All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give a few minutes to let people join in. So while we're doing that, I'm just going to cover a quick few housekeeping items. First off, my name is Dane Sheritz, and I will be your moderator slash part-time panelist for this session. I'd like to remind you that we are live and we are recording this. And we will make this recording available on demand and on YouTube after we've wrapped up. And as we're going through our different sections, please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the question and answer tab at the bottom in the chat box, and we're going to try to answer as many of them as we can today. So with that out of the way, officially welcome to the AI Security Ask Me Anything session. Before I introduce our panelists, we'd love to get to know all of you in the audience, so please drop an answer to the webinar poll about what best describes your role at your company. And as you're answering that, we'll kick it off to our actual introductions. And I'll start with myself. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Dane Sheritz, and I am an innovation architect at HackerOne, which among my roles among my responsibilities includes helping customers navigate the wild world of AI security and AI safety. I'm joined by two amazing panelists, Kayla and Andre, and I'll kick it off to them to introduce themselves. Would love to hear from each of you a little bit about your who you are, your company that you're representing, and your role. And I'll start with you, Andre.
Hey everyone, thanks for the invite to be here. It's really good to be here. So I'm Andrea, I'm a co-founder and CTO at Ethiac. We are building an autonomous ethical hacking platform to find vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. And at the same time, I also give classes in the University of Porto here in Portugal, where I teach students about information security. And I'm also a bug bounty hunter on HackerOne, well, mostly live hacking events with their biggest customers.
Yeah, awesome. Got a chance to work with Andre over the course of our LHEs, and it's really awesome to have him on this panel and have like such a great hacking talent here. Kayla, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So I'm Kayla Underkoffler, a lead security engineer in the CTO office with Zenity. I'm a former hackeroni, so I love being able to be here on this convo today. It's like coming home, being with everybody. So at Zenity, we are an AI agent security focused company. We really look at securing the whole life cycle of AI agents from build time to runtime. And for me personally, I get to work a lot with the standards and regulations and policies around AI agents, just trying to evangelize that they should be included in those things first off, and then what that should look like, as well as some cool work with the open source community, like with OWASP, just encouraging the guidelines and different guidances for AI agents. So that's a little bit about what I do and what we do at Zenity.
Yeah, awesome to have you here, Kayla. While you were at HackerOne, you had your hands in so many different things, and it's so great to have the perspective that you bring to this session. So just to sort of orient people to what we're going to be doing today, we have three main sections that we're going to want to make sure we get through. Talking about offensive testing in the age of AI, how to scale security and enterprise readiness, AI security, enterprise readiness, and governing agentic AI. So we're going to ask a few questions that are related to these topics. And then once we're through that, we're going to go to a live Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions as they come to you, and we'll make sure to cover that in those sections. So starting off, um, you know, Andre, would love to hear from you. How is hacking AI systems different from hacking traditional apps or traditional IT infrastructure?
So yeah, that's a good question. It's similar in the way in terms of the thought process, because we are analyzing a black box, but it's way different when it comes to testing these kind of models. So when you talk about traditional security or non-LLM based security and offensive testing, We are not talking about this kind of vulnerability categories and the new vulnerability categories that exist with especially AI models and LLMs, large language models. So when we are hacking basically traditional web applications or desktop applications and so on, we are focusing mostly on exploiting the code logic to find memory corruption vulnerabilities in binaries, for example, bypassing authentication, leaking PII, and so on. And that's very deterministic, right? So because as a hacker, so what I do is I go and test this endpoint, and it's deterministic, right? It's very deterministic. The response will be, well, most of the cases will be always the same unless something breaks or something like that. When we're talking about these models, and especially AI assistants or other AI-based functionality, we are talking about attacking mostly a statistical model, right? It will predict the answer and the tokens that will reply, and there is mostly no code, right? So it's all based on the training data of the model. So that lack of determinism, it's a skill that it needs to be developed by security researchers and AI red teamers, for example. And there are really good ones that are always after these prompt injection bypasses and trying to understand how they can make the model do something that it wasn't supposed to. And hacking is all about redefining the impossible and trying to find new paths to do something. What I've seen in real cases is that even with this probabilistic behavior, these AI models have more and more access to tools, to functions, right? They can call this function that will retrieve data from our account, for example, to have for the model to have context on the data that we have, so that the model can actually help us and correlate that eventually with other data that it may have access to, right? So basically, I've seen a lot of these vulnerabilities or second order vulnerabilities with models that I actually reported to top tier organizations, some even on HackerOne, which was like, for example, executing arbitrary SQL queries, for example, by convincing the model that it would need to execute a raw SQL query, for example. Another example is visiting a website. It can basically have a tool to retrieve a URL, for example. And if a user can basically make the model or convince the model to list these functions or to leak the system prompt or something like that, it will eventually be able to call a user supplied function, for example, and make it and then exploit the traditional vulnerability behind that. And I've seen other types of vulnerabilities from prompt injection, which is really difficult to fix, of course, but I've seen also a very common mistake, which is the lack of limiting user input tokens, which will basically cause a denial of service in the model. And I've seen these, and the assistant becomes unavailable to other users. So that's also something that is very important. So long story short, it's similar in terms of the hacking process of hacking a black box, but at the same time, it's different because it requires skills to sort of social engineer the model and try to convince it to do things that it wasn't supposed to. And then there are other classes of vulnerabilities that are mostly pre-training or leaking training data, and that's way different than traditional web application testing or traditional testing in general.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I really love that you just to emphasize the distinction between like deterministic systems,
Yeah.
just standard traditional apps, and like probabilistic, stochastic systems like AI and like the actual AI models behind some of these chatbots or agentic tools. And just because as we're talking about this, I do want to emphasize just sort of something that I know you've seen, I've seen in my time as a hobbyist bug bounty hunter, and we've seen these kinds of issues just publicly disclosed where, yeah, there's a lot of testing you can find on the actual AI system and the actual AI model, but even the underlying infrastructure can still have bugs itself, right?
Yeah.
If their access controls aren't configured in a way that prevents user A from being able to read user B's messages, that's maybe not an AI bug, but that is a bug in an AI system that could reveal sensitive information. Kayla, as we're talking about this, I think Andre and I have been talking about, more simplistic AI systems with like tool calls, but how does this relate to the world of agentic AI or more advanced AI agent systems?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that when I get into conversations, especially if we're talking about governance and the security best practices, right, that are trying to be built out right now for how organizations need to roll out AI securely, there's I still encounter this today where if you talk to someone about prompt injection, literally I was at an event like 2 weeks ago or something, and someone was like, well, I mean, if I get a successful prompt injection, what I'm just gonna make the model say something it's not supposed to say. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, we've passed that point. Like now, not only can you make the model say something it's not supposed to say, but now the model has arms and legs through agentic AI. And it can go invoke tools. It can pull customer data. It can exfiltrate that customer data. It can do all of this seamlessly behind the scenes because that's what it's built to do. It was built to gather customer data and send it internally to the team who's a, customer success team or whatever. So it has all of the ability, and at the same time it has all of the inherent vulnerabilities that we've been talking about already. And so you've given this powerful entity built on AI, on through an LLM, arms and legs to be able to go and invoke tools, do whatever it needs to, interact with data. And so now you're just talking about a story that's much more severe when it gets to the possible impacts of what can happen. And that's like that's whether that's compromise or whether that's just AI being AI, hallucination, or, taking an action on its own that maybe you didn't intend for it to take, but it was still trying to achieve the goal and, deleted a whole bunch of stuff for you. And we've seen plenty of examples like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so we've been talking about like actually trying to hack these AI systems. Andre, we'd love to hear from you. How is AI being used by hackers or people that are building hacking systems? Like how can AI be used offensively?
Yeah, so first maybe let's talk about what's happening on the attacker side. With all these AI being available to a lot of people, what's been happening, and we have seen some reports even from some of our customers at FIAC, we have seen that when a CVE comes out, sometimes they start getting attacked. I'm not talking about AI specific vulnerabilities, but they are basically starting getting attacked. And it's getting faster and faster for them to receive these kind of attacks. So we actually need to be faster than the attackers. There was a recent report this year from Cloudflare where they have detected that after CVE disclosure, after a few minutes, there was an automated or a supposedly automated exploit already running. So we have these kind of tools that are really good at generating code, and the bad guys can also use them even if they are script kiddies, for example, or they don't know, or even if they don't have sufficient knowledge about security, they can just ask a model to generate an exploit that could be slop or not, but they could generate an exploit and potentially try to exploit and damage organizations for multiple reasons, right? So we have seen that for this kind of automation to be deployed at scale by the bad guys. So the good guys are also doing that, but I'll get there. AI is also improving multiple tools, deterministic tools. So when, let's say that, and there are multiple steps in pen testing, for example, or bug bounty hunting, and hunters are basically trying to automate these and try to connect LLMs to reconnaissance tools, for example, to expand the amount of assets that may be hidden in the attack surface of an organization to go further. This is something that at FIAC we have been improving our recon a lot with this, and we can also find more assets. At the same time, there are multiple reports about the attackers using AI for phishing. for example, to improve phishing techniques a lot. We all suffer that. In the past, and especially here in Portugal, we could maybe easily notice that Portuguese wasn't that well written. And now with these models, like it's really convincing, and they are basically providing a lot of context about the victims to the AI models as well. There are some reports from NCSC, National Cybersecurity Center in the UK as well recently, where they prove or they show that the AI being more available to more people is also increasing the amount of ransomware attacks again. That's something that is coming out in the UK again, because it's also easier to deploy this kind of tools. And there have been multiple reports about having these chatbots that are really good at generating malware and stuff like that. So, but let's get back to the good side of things, right? So the white hats or ethical hackers are basically trying to integrate these to avoid more repetitive tasks. So instead of us just, going through the same tools all over again, we can have the AI generating leads for us, and these kind of models are really good at, if we feed them like a context about the target application, we can try to find vulnerabilities in an automated manner. And this is something that is leveraged through what we call today in the industry as hackbots, and it's something that we are also researching internally at ETIAC. But there are some concerns, of course, right? And to connect with the previous topic that you were just discussing, how can we ensure that such an hackbot, for example, or such a model doesn't delete data or damage customer data, or these kind of tools that can help us, not just in hacking in general, in ethical hacking, but while also connecting these AI systems to other data sources or scenes. We can leverage these in three ways, basically, in my opinion. And we need to implement guardrails, and the guardrails basically can be implemented at the prompt level. So you kind of guide the model to do the things that you really want to, and you set rules at the prompt level to shape the model behavior. And then you should always add a deterministic filter as well to enforce, let's say, structured policies and patterns to filter content or actions that you don't really need to do. Think it like a firewall for the model actions. And then there's the LLM or agentic layer, where you can add some contextual judgment, right? You can have other agents giving their opinion about the previous agent actions if they fall into some criteria that needs to be evaluated as well. So it's something that all the offensive testing and the AI being used, not just by hackers, but also we need to be really careful about this and make it work. And at the same time, when the models are trained, it's also another way to try to prevent the model to do unexpected actions as well. But I mean, like we have seen with all prompt injection and so on, it will basically still be kind of possible. We can reduce the probability, even with these three methods that I just described, we can reduce the probability to nearly zero, but we cannot make it zero, because it's all about security in general. It's like we cannot achieve 100% security. There will always be a vulnerability, but we can work to make those amount of vulnerabilities as low as possible. And that's the entire idea about offensive security. And with the AI, what we can do in the offensive side is to scale it more. It won't replace what a human hacker can do, but it performs well better than scanners in terms of finding more specific vulnerabilities that may affect given system on the internet. So yeah, that's basically it, and there is still a way to go to understand how these technologies can be used in more steps about pen testing or hacking in general. But yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's like, what I love about having these sort of in-depth conversations about like using AI for hacking is as you start, when you talk to people that are really building with this, I think there's this idea in the popular consciousness that like, oh, you can just throw AI at like a code base and it's going to find 0 days. And it's like, well, that's not where the technology is today, but you can use it in some of these ways that you're talking about, that it acts as like sort of this force multiplier and can really help scale security research and find really and really help humans do um, scale to a level they wouldn't have been able to before. Um, Kayla, we were talking a little bit about hackbots, and I was curious if you had any perspective on like what governance could look like for people that are building hackbots or using hackbots or interested in involving hackbots in their day-to-day workflow.
I mean, I think Andre touched on really, really good guardrails in the way that you should go about implementing this. I think the biggest thing um, is that you need to treat that hackbot like almost like a person, your own human pen tester, your own users internally. And you need to make sure that we're watching what's going on so that you can detect and respond in case of issues. So like what Andre was talking about, like have the guardrails in place that help minimize risk of hackbot being an issue one way or another, right? Whether it's malicious or just an issue with the output, the hallucination, something. You have to monitor the activity the whole time so that you know what actions are being taken. And if you understand what a baseline activity, this is the norm, this is what we expect. When we deviate from that norm, that deserves investigation. That deserves someone looking into that. And I think making sure that we understand that any agents we're putting in our environment, whether it's specifically for security, an AI agent that's built to help us secure, or an AI agent that's built to help us do something else, we need to be watching what it's doing and understand what we expect, or at least the behavior, the pattern that's been laid down as a base layer, and then be able to respond in case of investigation, in case we do need to see what went wrong, what went off the rails. And I think also, so that's one thing. And I think the other thing is just emphasizing this whole scale thing we've been talking about. Scale is the biggest component to AI, whereas we were able to do a certain amount of things previously manually, even with the automation we had in place. Now we can do so much more, whether that is on the offense or defensive side of the house. Scale is where AI is making the largest impact for everyone.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Well, and somewhat related to this, I'm going to switch over to this governing an agentic AI and emerging risks section here. There's a lot of promise with agentic AI and the capabilities it offers, but it kind of opens up this whole new can of worms when it comes to risks. We were talking about hackbots, but how else can teams set more effective guardrails to mitigate harmful outputs, maybe as it relates to any kind of like safety risks or harmful biases or any kind of like legal compliance risks or things of that nature, maybe including security but outside of security.
Yeah. Um, so I'll just jump in here for this part. So I think that when we're talking about the risks that can occur with AI, with your model's LLM layer, we talked a lot about that already, like the making sure that it's not biased, what you're getting on the output, making sure that you don't have data poisoning. All this stuff Andre was talking about is critical because that is the foundation. We have to be sure that we are securing the model, and securing the users, from the output of the model. So all those different categories. And then when we talk about agentic AI sitting on top, I think I'm mostly going to focus in here and shift this to the agentic AI focus, um, because agentic AI inherits all of the same issues we've talked about. You can get poor answers, poor responses from the model with based on the model you're using and the inputs that you've put in. But we've now extended the threat landscape beyond just what you're seeing from the model through agentic AI. So I said this earlier, but we've given the model arms and legs now. So now it's in your environment, taking action on its own autonomously to get the job done. And that introduces new risk, new threats to the environment. And when we talk about guardrails, I like to put that into two categories of guardrails for agentic AI. You have your build time guardrails and your runtime guardrails. So when we're talking about build time, this is a pretty traditional security here, right? You're talking about how do we get as close to secure by design as we possibly can when you're building AI agents in the environment. So again, we're just laser focused on AI agents right now. When you're building these AI agents internally, it's important to have the guidance and guardrails in place to help those who are building agents understand what is okay and what is not. So that looks like secure configuration baselines. So you're letting your builders in your environment know these are the settings that you should be using. These are the environments you should be building in, which correlate to the data that you're giving your agent access to. Are you in proper SDLC here? Do you have a test environment, dev environment, a production environment that you're building these agents in? And the data correlates to that. The user access. How many users have access to this thing? Is it publicly available, which happens all the time? Those are all secure configuration baselines that need to be publicized within your organization so that the people who are building agents understand what goes into that and what they can and can't do. And again, gives them the guardrails for creating the most secure agent that they possibly can. We already talked about, which Andre, I loved your point. We cannot create a perfectly secure AI agent, a perfectly secure model. That will never happen because this is built on AI and AI is inherently vulnerable. So we can do our best to build in defense in depth along that whole life cycle, which is where when you're talking about your build time choices, making the best choices possible in order to reduce the attack surface later on. Another huge component when it comes to building AI agents internally is understanding who is building agents, because with this democratization of building in general, with the introduction of AI, anybody in your environment can build an AI agent if they have the access to the tools to do that. So you need to understand who is building what and what tools are they using, what environments, what does it look like? You could have your users might be interacting with M365, like the most out of the box agent you possibly can interact with. Or you'll have agents being built with low code, no code technology, a little bit more drag and drop, a little bit more like Legos. In that situation, there's more possibility for poor build choices. And you've introduced a totally new builder audience, and that is like the citizen developer, your everyday business users who are probably also able to interact with M365. But if they have Copilot Studio access, for example, they can build an agent from the ground up with low code, no code capabilities. So it's not as much of a free for all as like some of the other technologies. Like if you're building in the cloud, maybe you're using AWS Bedrock, or if you have endpoint developers on their endpoints building agents with Cursor, or you have like the true, PhDs in the back room who are building this whole architecture from the ground up. All of these things require different guardrails for this is how you build this thing securely. And you need to be sure that each of those audiences understand what that looks like for them. Because at the end of the day, once you release this agent into the environment, it doesn't matter all that much if it was built with Copilot Studio or if the PhDs built it in the back room. It's still an autonomous actor running around your environment. And that's where you introduce the runtime guardrails. So I always like looking at runtime like, you've brought your car to the mechanic because you have a problem with it. And they can look at the engine and they can see all the parts static, like just put together. What does it look like? But most of the time they're going to ask you to turn the car on because that's where they're going to see the true issues come to life. That's where they're going to hear the sounds and see the parts. And that's the same thing with AI agents in the environment. Runtime is where you're seeing these choices that you made during build time, which again, increase or decrease the attack surface in runtime. You're seeing those choices be combined with the inherent risk of AI. And you have to be able to, I touched on this earlier, but you have to be able to instill a monitoring process for your agents in the environment to understand what does normal look like? What is an acceptable baseline? What do we expect? While we know that these agents are not going to stick to the script every time, the more of a pattern, the more of a baseline we can get through their interaction in the environment, the better chances we have at alerting for possible anomalous activity. So if we're watching the activity, it's important that we also break down what makes an agent an agent. So we need to be able to watch the inputs and the outputs, prompts and response. That's absolutely critical. You need to be able to block those that you don't want in the environment from a prompt perspective, from an inputs perspective, but we'll never be able to 100% successfully block prompt injection. It will never happen. It'll be the 101st attempt that is successful. So you have to watch not only the inputs and the outputs, but the activity that the agent is doing along the way. What tools is it invoking? What data is it interacting with? What users are combined in this story? That breadcrumb just tells that breadcrumb trail tells the whole story of what an agent is doing. And if you have that understanding, that will allow you to detect and respond in case of anomalies in the environment. So those are your runtime components. And when you put that whole story together between build time and runtime, this is where you're building the best story you possibly can to have guardrails in place to secure your organization, your environment with these agents that are running around, hopefully making you so much more productive and innovative and all of those wonderful things, but doing that in a secure way.
That's really helpful. And it's like I really like the framing of like build time and runtime decisions and how you think of constructing this. And as you were talking about that, I was reading at the poll that we launched earlier, and it seems like we actually have a lot of security practitioners in this audience. And Andre, while we have you here, I wanted to sort of ask you to put your hacker hat on and ask you, if you got invited to a private program today, fresh scope, and it's like AI agent in scope, how would you approach like trying to probe like some of these like runtime, build time issues, or how would you go about like trying to detect and like if you had 1 week and you're like, I want to get a critical out of this, how would you at least start that initial process for testing an AI
Yeah.
agent?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And Kayla, like your answer was just like super brilliant. Like I've actually learned like some new stuff. So thanks for that. So yeah, I would basically, I received multiple invites already, especially on HackerOne for this kind of AI specific programs. And the way I approach it is that I go directly to the chatbot. Usually there's always a chatbot. Not always, but that's the common case. And I just started interacting with it and trying to leak as much information as possible about their general instructions in general. So AKA trying to leak the system prompt, right? Trying to understand what functions are and tools are available. And if it refuses to kind of disclose that, you can always try to use the intended functionality and check documentation and so on, and try to understand what kind of things you could ask. As an attacker, you could basically go through videos and demonstrations and try to see what kind of questions you are supposed to make to the assistant. And then after that, you can always test for generic problems that may affect any model, such as the denials of service that I was mentioning. It's a very common one that I've been seeing, is that you just send a bunch of A's, like 100,000 or something like that, and it will basically eventually break the model, or it will take like several minutes to respond, which is an indicator of it being basically overwhelmed and trying to answer, and it's resulting in significant costs to the organization if abused, and lack of availability to other users and legitimate users. Then you could also try to understand if it's a very specific model or a third-party model, like from OpenAI or Anthropic and so on, that is running behind the scenes. If it's a specific one, you could try some some attacks like making it leak some training data, which is difficult. But I mean, you could try these kind of attacks, and I actually tried, but I wasn't able to find any of those yet. But you could try to make it repeat, like Dropbox did with OpenAI, right? Try to repeat this word like forever, and then it starts leaking data, right? Which could be but it's super specific about the model itself. And then getting back to the tools, which is the most important stuff, especially for security practitioners or bug bounty hunters, which is where most bugs are, in my opinion, especially when it's not just an assistant without access to anything, right? When it can access data, like you can try to inject parameters that may inject into some API request that is performed internally, some SQL query. It could be injected in tricking the bot into visiting or making a web request, and you could make it, for example, an SSRF. I've seen that working as well. So I would basically approach it like this. Try to focus. I usually focus first on this kind of more common vulnerabilities that may affect the model directly, or the implementation and the prompts and so on, to make it do or high privileged operations, for example, or stuff like that. And then I'll move on to actually try to understand if we can trigger any traditional vulnerability. And something that can also occur, especially, and I've seen, and it's also common, it's cross-site scripting in the model, especially. But I mean, it could be a self scenario when you actually inject the payload or make the model answer something with HTML injected, right? And in that case, and chatbots have that a lot because they mostly render markdown, and then companies just take that markdown and they write like some processor for the markdown, convert to HTML, and then they realize that they need to sanitize the HTML with to prevent these kind of attacks. But I've seen those working. You just need to find a scenario where another source of data that is controlled by another user within the same organization or some other page could return something to the model, and that would render in the response from the model somewhere. That could be in the chatbot, that could be in a generated PDF, for example, and we are talking about traditional vulnerabilities in this case, second order ones, right? Like injecting inside of a PDF that is generated by AI, and if you can make it inject HTML and gets rendered, you can do all sorts of attacks usually, like you were doing without, if the AI wasn't there. But again, it's a matter of being persistent, and maybe it will work only 10% of the times, right?
Yeah. And just to really emphasize for all the bug bounty hunters, something you said, a lot of times chatbots render markdown in HTML, and that might include image tags, and that might include making a call to a URL that maybe you own, and maybe you can exfiltrate data that kind of way. I also just really want to emphasize something else you said to the bug bounty program managers that might be on this call. A lot of what you said of like trying to understand the app and understand the functionality, that could probably be a big time suck for you if you're someone that only has like a limited amount of time to spend on testing these models, or on this app. So like the more white box approach, more gray box approach, and things that bug bounty programs can provide to researchers to help them get up and running, the quicker they might find stuff, and the less friction there will be for hackers hitting the ground running. But this has been a great discussion. I'm actually going to move us along to the next section here, just in the interest of time, because we're starting to get some good questions coming in. So for this one, how are enterprises keeping up with AI tool adoption along with strict data security and governance requirements? So I'll take a first stab at this, and I would love for you all to fill in the gaps if there's anything you think I miss. But kind of guiding this answer to security teams, I think that employees are going to end up using AI whether you like it or not. So it's important to actually have like a good, coherent AI policy, risk policy, and all risk management begins with an inventory. So first things first, something that organizations should already have done, which is having good data classification in place. Actually making sure you can define like what is sensitive proprietary information and what is what you're more willing to have out there publicly, like marketing copy, because it's going to be published anyway, And by having that data classification, that can help inform like which AI tools can be used for which kind of data. And then beyond that, I think it's helpful to have um, a like good understanding of the different risk profiles of different AI tools, right? Are we talking about a private uh, self-trained model that's you're running inference on in your like internal systems that's not leaking out to anything in the world, and you're just using that for your own data? That has a different risk profile than a third-party AI tool that's just making an API call to ChatGPT or Anthropic, right? These are two totally different things. So as you're building up this inventory, you can help use that to inform a policy. And I want to emphasize that I think the best security teams are the ones that position themselves as enablers and helping businesses actually really harness this technology and aren't just like the no police. So that was my quick take on this question. I'll open up to either one of you. Is there anything that I missed or anything you disagree with or anything you would add to that as like a way of thinking about AI tool adoption with requirements?
I would definitely add that all those things that you said, yes, 100%, like inventory. You can't go anywhere without inventory. I would also add that you need to get your stakeholders aligned. What use cases are approved in the organization? Who in the business is involved in those use cases? Is this really the business, like marketing and finance, who are running this, HR? You need leaders from that organization to be aligned with security so that from a top-down perspective, those policies are agreed upon unilaterally. And that also goes up to, do you have a center of excellence or some specific group that is at a very, very senior level that is deciding the direction of AI in your organization? That whole stakeholder group needs to be aligned. That's probably one of the most challenging components of AI in the organization today, is getting everybody to the table and making decisions on what you do and do not want to do with AI, or even in the stages that you're going to approach it, because that helps to set the rest of your governance trajectory. And so getting stakeholders aligned is huge. And then the other thing I would add here is that we need to start treating AI agents specifically, I will say, as insider threats. And they need to be incorporated into your insider threat program and policy. That's like definitely a security staple, really, in any organization. And AI agents need to be a part of that for how you're going to help monitor what they're doing in the environment, just like your human users are incorporated into that process. So I'd say those are two things I'd add to this overall security governance. How are you building it in and what components go into that? That's two things I'd add.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Andre, anything you want to add on top of that?
I think that I've noticing, this is not my main area of expertise, as you can imagine, but I've seen like some organizations forgetting about data anonymization when it comes to, flowing data into third-party models. It's something that can also be done, not just because of, these kind of requirements, because we should actually care about the data and privacy of our users and how we process their data. And there is some information that we just shouldn't be flowing into, especially third-party models, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we have, I think, one other question here. Then we're going to be moving it on to the audience Q&A. So for those in your audience that have a question, please drop it in the Q&A section here in Zoom, and we'll be getting to that shortly. Okay, so this last question: how can security teams move from one-time AI assessments to continuous, ongoing oversights? Again, I'll take a first stab at this, and then would love for you all to jump in and let me know where I went wrong or where something might be missing. I think in terms of so in terms of AI testing, you, you definitely don't want just snapshots, right? You want to try to be doing everything you can to be actually monitoring the full life cycle. Obviously, you want the initial assessments, but you don't want that to be like just a once a year compliance thing, right? Like these are, as we were talking about throughout this, probabilistic systems. There's a lot going on under the hood. kind of thing that not even people that are building AI models don't fully understand how these things work. So you want to have some sort of life cycle management or some way of monitoring these systems out in the wild. So you want continuous testing. Uh, Surprise, surprise, I work at HackerOne, so I'm going to say bug bounties are a great way of helping facilitate that. So bug bounty programs, I think, are a great method, but you should also look at making sure you have just standard monitoring and detection, right? You don't want to just have these systems out operating in the wild and not have any visibility into what's going on or into like what tools are being called when, what the inputs are being used in those tools. Like there needs to be some kind of early detection and monitoring system. And then last piece I would say is automation. For you want to have some automation in place, right? Especially for like testing known issues, problems you've found in the past, something incorporate your SDLC so that way you push a new model, you push a new tool, you change the system prompt, you can run these automations and see if previous issues resurface or if there's other things that you need to dive into. Kayla, Andre, that was my quick take on it. Anything that I missed, anything that you would add?
I would just emphasize continuous and automation from what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add two things. The first one is that continuous bug bounty program to assess AI models really good. Companies can get like hackers like me and top AI hackers like Rezo, Justin, and more, taking a look into these kind of implementations from people that actually act like Google itself, Google Gemini, and so on, for example. And the other thing that I would like to add is that it's interesting because the technology that we are developing, we in a recent experiment, we actually launched it against the AI model, and it came the question like, can our Hackbot hack an AI model? And the kind of payloads that it was attempting were super interesting, and it was actually able to find a few vulnerabilities. Well, in some CTF scenarios from the lab, but still it also brings the possibility of using AI to test AI in a continuous manner, which is also very interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be AIs all the way down some point eventually.
Who knows? Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll move it on to the Q&A section. So first question that we had come in, what is the best approach for handling insider threats with the organization as you keep considering the general security and access of your AI externally? Kayla, can I look to you for a first pass at that one?
Sure, I'll start for sure. So best approaches for handling insider threat. I think the first thing is like I said, acknowledging that AI introduces its own unique component of insider threat to the organization. AI agents are super gullible and they are very friendly and they want to help you. And that can be abused 100%. That can be abused. It's same with a model, right? Same with a model. But again, when we're looking at the agent, we're looking then at the ability for the agent to go out and do autonomous things throughout the environment. And so you need to first acknowledge that it is an insider threat because it is susceptible to manipulation, to abuse, to compromise, just like your human users are. Then from there, you need most organizations, I would hope all organizations have an established insider threat program today. And a lot of what that looks like is monitoring your user activity. What are your users doing on the network on a regular basis? There's a lot of tools that are out there today that help us do this. It ties in a lot with data loss prevention. What data are your users interacting with? What behavior is normal? And where does the outlier come into play? So all of those things are existing today for insider threat. That's going to give you a tip off if all of a sudden someone is exfiltrating a ton of customer data. That is the same as a human as it is with the AI agents. The only difference for AI agents is that it's going to be a different tool set that we have in place to monitor their activity in the environment. So once you have the incorporation of AI agents into your established insider threat program, again, it's about setting those tools in place for the continuous monitoring, for the detection and response capabilities. It's about establishing a baseline in and of itself. That is a step in the process. Just like if you were to monitor a human user, what's normal for Kayla? Is it normal for me to log in from an IP address in a totally different country and exfiltrate a bunch of data? Probably, maybe not, maybe not. And once you have that baseline, you can alert for possible anomalies. Same activity with agents, except for, again, it's not going to be, did the AI agent log in from somewhere? It's what's the IP address maybe interacting with the agent, or is the agent, if you ask the agent to summarize your emails, and that's the standard engagement with your agent that you do, that's a standard activity. If all of a sudden you say, summarize my emails, and it goes out and pulls a bunch of customer data and then exfiltrates that data and sends you back a link to use for your summary of emails in which the link is activated and exfiltrates the data, that's not normal for your agent. And that should be able to be highlighted and investigated. It's the same with what an average user would do. So that's like my start for that. Sorry, I know that was a lot.
No, I have nothing to add to that. I think that was great. That covered everything I could have thought of and more. Andre, is there anything that you would add?
Not much, but I mostly agree with something that you already said, which is like sometimes when we think about AI problems or AI problems that come up with this kind of segregation and try to understand how can we prevent this kind of data leakage and so on that you already mentioned. A lot of times when I think about AI challenges, I think about how would we do this if we were basically thinking about the human, right? Like how, because we are basically trying to automate a few boring processes a lot of times, or repetitive tasks with technology, not just with the AI. And the controls for the agents should be very similar to the ones that you already have for humans, right? Like zero trust, data segregation, access controls. And those need to be deterministic, right? And the same applies to the agents, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, we have another question that I feel like is perfect for you, Andre. Where do you see AI having the biggest disruptive impact on pen testing practices in the next 2 to 3 years?
So AI having the biggest disruptive impact on red teaming. Good question. I hope it doesn't happen. That's my first my first thinking process about this question. I think it could basically lead into data being deleted, in my opinion. I think, or any availability related, than rather other the dimensions of security, such as integrity or availability, because we are seeing that today more than models sometimes leaking actually our code or our data locally, or changing stuff that we cannot revert. I think it's more about availability than other things. And sorry, because my dogs are a bit excited today. Not sure if you can hear them.
My dog was doing the same thing earlier. Well, so I think you're saying disruptive as in like ways it might break things. And I read that question as disruptive as in like, here's what pen testing and general red teaming looks like today. What is AI going to make pen testing look like in 2 to 3 years from now?
Okay, I was thinking about disruptions and not,
No, yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's what the person meant, but I like my question better. I'm going with mine.
Okay, that brings me into other answer. So I think that it will dramatically change. Like a lot of pen testing will change as well, not just about AI red teaming, but pen testing in general. I think it's already changing, right? A lot of aspects in our life, but it will bring us into a world where we have agents trying to find vulnerabilities for us. to be co-pilots in that task as well. There's room for both autonomous agents and co-pilot tools that will help us or get us leads. But the way I see it is that, and from the feelings that I'm having and data that we are being analyzing, especially in our research team, is that the vulnerabilities that are found by these kind of models are fundamentally different. And I'll give you an example. I was participating in the CTF and I was trying to launch our agent on the same capture the flag competition. And the vulnerabilities and the flags that I found and the vulnerabilities that the agent found were different. Okay. And that brings me to an opinion that I already had, which was define creativity, right? Artificial creativity is different from natural creativity. And I think that it will be a sort of a symbiosis between humans and machines that will happen not just in red teaming in general, but also in other aspects in our society.
Could I push you into making a crazy claim, or like would you say that there might be any kind of bug? So the way humans look at bugs and the way that AIs are finding bugs are different. Is there enough overlap such that, like, do you think there's might be a bug class that gets completely eliminated for at least like bug bounty hunters or traditional researchers? Like, do you think there's a world where 3 years from now all XSS is detected by AI, or is it always just going to be there's different flavors of XSS will get detected by AI, different flavors of XSS will get detected by humans?
I don't have sufficient data to tell you that, but I can tell you that XSS can be found like, and one of the lessons that we have is that XSS can be found with deterministic analysis. You don't need to, sometimes you don't need to bring like a machine gun to fire an ad, right? So you don't need to, and it's even costly, right? It's you don't need those kind of technologies to do that, in my opinion. So I don't think it's about vulnerability classes, but it's rather about we are going to have models being able to find these kind of vulnerabilities because they have context about the application, right? A scanner doesn't know that it's analyzing, for example, a shop where you can buy a product, right? So it doesn't know about that. So it's more focused on vulnerability classes. With agents, what we are talking here is that they have this information, so they can basically try to hijack a checkout flow, for example, and try to find a vulnerability from multiple classes, right? So, but I don't have sufficient data again to give you a precise answer on that.
That's a very good, very scientific answer. I appreciate that. Okay, so we have, I think, time for just one last question, and I'll give it over to you, Kayla. Are today's security frameworks sufficient for agentic AI, or do we need completely net new paradigms?
So far it has depended, because I'm working in a lot of these working groups today. There are different approaches based on the organization. So OWASP, for example, has an agentic security initiative that is a part of the LLM, the Gen AI project, right? Who came out with the LLM top 10. So the agentic security initiative is taking is building like things like threat modeling guides, how to build secure agentic application guides, and it's strictly from the perspective of what is new about agentic AI. I remember many a conversation where we were talking about threats, and that we always had to bring back the focus to, is this new and unique because of the agentic characteristics we're talking about? We didn't want a repeat of the LLM top 10. This is different. So some groups have taken the approach of let's create something net new. And I think that it's deserved. I think that when you come to something like threat modeling for agentic AI, the what could possibly happen is vastly different from the traditional technology software applications we've dealt with in the past. So then you look at the flip side of the house, which is like your governance framework. So NIST, the cybersecurity framework 2.0, right? They're a perfect example of gratefully receiving the feedback from the security community, which was, please do not create another governance framework specifically for AI. Please do not do that. And so instead, the approach that they have taken is, okay, let's make a community profile. Let's make an overlay for AI specific concerns that sit on the foundations of the cybersecurity framework. So that's the approach that some of the more traditional governance bodies are taking in this whole journey. So yeah, I've seen both. And I think it just depends on how much unique considerations are in play that would deserve a net new framework versus could be overlaid onto the existing framework.
That makes perfect sense. Well, thank you. I think that brings us right to time. Really appreciate you all today. This was a great conversation, and thank you all for joining us. And you should get an email with the recording, and this will be posted on YouTube shortly. But thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.